All right. Welcome to episode 25 of the Athletic Philosopher podcast. I am your host, Jordan Goldstein. Some call me doctor, most call me professor, former university prof in sport history, sport philosophy, sport sociology, current fitness and life coach, tribal professor, endurance training coach, all the above, none of the above, usually somewhere in between. And I am excited today to welcome my friend and brother AJ Londono to the podcast. AJ is a mutual lover of motion and flow and moving your body in creative, dynamic, exciting ways and harnessing sort of the ways in which our bodies can shape our minds and hearts. And I've loved following his journey, and we've had some great conversations, and I thought he was a perfect guest to have on this podcast, where we simply talk about ideas and motion and philosophy and sports and exercise all at the same time. And he's been on my radar as a guest, and we've had a couple of false starts in terms of getting this thing scheduled. So I'm just super grateful for his flexibility, both in terms of scheduling, but also, as you'll find out, in terms of his nimbleness as a coach and as a fitness instructor himself. So welcome, AJ. Why don't you introduce yourself to the beautiful people out there, and then I will kick this open discussion off with the question that I've been waiting to ask you for a long time on this podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you. I have been a huge fan of your page since I have founded Jordan. I think the philosophy behind sport is so cool and fascinating, and to have a like-minded soul on X, which is how we met, I think is super cool. So my name is AJ. I've been a business owner of my company Elevate Movement since 2020. I've been a personal training coach since 2010. And it was a few years after that, about 2014, so like 11 years ago, that I went to a course that was a functional training course on it, shout out, in Austin, Texas. And that training really changed my perspective behind training, behind life itself. And it really empowered me to look at life like a video game, or look at myself like the hero of my own story. So it really took looking outside of the box of what training could be and what life could be to take an active role in life. And that really changed my life. And then it changed the course of how I coached, and then ultimately the business that I created. So yeah, Elevate Movement is all about conquering sedentary lifestyle, which is something that even as a fitness coach, I had a lot of symptoms in my life of sedentary lifestyle. And as I've slowly conquered those things and overcome those things, I've become an elevated version of myself. And now my coaching is to help humans all around the world elevate how they breathe, how they move, and how they feel. So that's me, and that's what I'm on a mission to do, my friend.
Well, there you go. If I can remember, I will definitely put your handle and links to your coaching and your business for the people that are interested. And just that description alone, I think everybody out there listening knows why I was so eager to have you on, so that we could talk. And that's so cool that it was 2014 that you did the functional training with On It, because it was in 2015 when I actually discovered On It myself, as I was searching for new, creative, and exploratory and fun ways to move my own body. And it was in 2015 that I bought my first steel club from On It. And I've been using those implements, the clubs and the maces, ever since. And I'm actually going to, once I stop recording this one, I'm going to go pick up a 25 pound On It club and go swing that bad boy around for fun. So that's very cool. I'm sure we'll dovetail back into something like that on this discussion. But as I do with the guests that are fortunate or maybe unfortunate enough to be invited onto this podcast, I don't have an agenda. I have one broad topic one broad question that I want to start off with, and then we're just going to let the conversation go. Maybe we'll have a resolution. Maybe we'll just wind up kind of back at the start. But that's the fun of philosophy. Like, we don't have to try to solve problems. We just have to try to deepen our understanding and move a little bit more closely to the truth. So with that in mind, the question I have for you, AJ, why is flow so important in finding consistency, love, and joy with exercise, sport, or physical activity? And how do you incorporate flow into your own coaching, training, and athletic philosophy?
I love that question, man. I love that question. This is going to be a great conversation because this is my a big th- thought line and process that I am constantly on or around in my own life. So you talked about my handle and asking about flow. My handle is flow with AJ, and flow is a massive part of my life. Um, I believe that flow is a state. It's an energetic state where everything going on seems to be synchronized in a rhythmic, patternistic kind of way. And when you're aware of the synchronicity there, things that are transpiring seem to be happening in a effortless manner, and it seems almost magical. Now, for the longest time, you hear about it in so many different ways, like basketball players that are getting hot and are on fire, or, people who meditate and you hear about their brain waves being at a certain frequency, or poker players at the highest level can basically tell you that what everybody else's hands are. And there's this energetic state, there's a similarity to all those things where just the right circumstances have happened at the right chain of events where it seems magical, and it's hard to explain if people haven't experienced it. But the interesting thing is that it's something that can be felt in so many different disciplines. So whether you're someone who has done competitive sport and have done it to a high level, or you're a musician who expresses yourself in music, or you're a painter, or you're a writer and you're expressing yourself with words. What our company does with movement, we believe that movement is a language as well. And if you're seeking mastery in any kind of discipline or any kind of language, you will go down that path to a point where you know it well enough where that efficient, effortless, synchronous, energetic state is found. But in order to be able to experience that, it has to be in something that you're fluent in and you can actually express yourself in with like minimal thought process of the prefrontal cortex, or like you really got to turn off the logic brain and let the reactive impulsive brain, the one that's more deeper conscious, you let that thing express itself. So um it is a very mystical state that sounds woo woo unless you've experienced it. I think personally that I have found through the discipline of becoming fluent in multiple different things, I have been able to find that state in different disciplines. And what that set my whole life on was creating a framework to help other people do the same thing, which is exactly what Elevate is. ELVT is a framework that, in my mind, is the scientific method to find flow state. The hard part about it is that you have to start the journey and get under you have to understand enough of the path first as a big step one. There's quite a big learning curve, before you're able to find that effortless flow state. Because this is something that's even talked about in kung fu and martial arts and the Tao, like the original philosophy, right? In the Tao, they talk about Wu Wei, I believe it's effortless action. It's not that there's no action, it's that there's just the right amount of stuff going on, that there's no excess energy on the outside. So I like to show this best in rope flow. When I do rope flow, it's one of my favorite training styles. If you guys look at my page, you'll see that it almost looks magical because the rope is flowing around. It looks like a magic trick. And when I first saw someone else doing it, that's what blew my mind. And now when I do it, it's finding that state that is the best part about it, is that just enough energy coming from the ground up where my body is moving in sync with the rope, which is in sync with my breath. And all of the energies in that environment are flowing at that same pattern. That's when flow state happens. And it can also be described by some people as being in the present moment. I mean, even having a conversation with someone, when you express yourself with the language you're speaking to a deeper degree, you find yourself in this magical state where like time disappears. That's that's flow state as well. It's like what flow state really is just being in the present moment and not overthinking that you're in that present moment, because the present moment itself is like a bubble. When you overthink that, oh shit, I'm in the present moment, you pop the bubble and you're out of it, you know? So yeah, flow is a massive important thing in my life. I think it seems like an unattainable thing for many people. And for a lot of the beginning of my life, even watching anime and video games like Dragon Ball Z, you know, Goku, his final state, Ultra Instinct, is flow state. That's exactly what flow state is. It's that Wu Wei, no mind, no excess energy, just complete flow state. Uh, for the geek, we find out about this in video games and anime, but it's a real thing that you can experience, and that's what my whole life is about.
All right. That's such a cool answer. Flowing all over the place. There were a lot of big time words. There was a lot of big time concepts, and I'm sure we'll circle back on a few of them. But I want to, this is a philosophy podcast in some sort of a sense. So I want to pick out two things there, specifically philosophically. One is this concept of Wu Wei, which I love this concept, and I'm so glad you brought it up. And a lot of what I'm attempting to do with my own athletic philosophy is merging the best of the East and the West together. And Taoism, and in particular, this idea of Wu Wei, to me, just strikes such a beautiful harmony with a lot of the classical Greek ideas of virtue, of becoming, and of utilizing the challenge and the truth in order to reach towards our highest potential. So when you were talking about the flow that you can get in a conversation, like Socrates pops directly into my mind, like the Socratic method, the Socratic dialogue of interrogating each other's ideas, not to win an argument, but to reach a deeper understanding of truth. And that's sort of the idea of the dialogos, right? So we've got Wu Wei, which is effectively effortless grace, right? And the dialogos, which is the challenge of the sort of like the challenge of conflict in order to discover truth, right? And you mentioned Kung Fu, and then you also mentioned competitive athletics. And in the West, when we're talking about sports, we're talking usually like winner take all, I'm going to beat you styles of sport. And when we're talking about the East, we're talking about maybe more expressive, more non-competitive styles. Maybe the best bridge of the East and the West might be something like surfing, right? Where there are surf competitions, but like, can you actually really have a surf competition? Nobody gets to surf the same wave twice. You can schedule a competition out in the ocean, but like if the conditions aren't there, like no one's going to be able to surf the wave. And a lot of like the best surfers in the world refuse to compete because that goes kind of against like the ethos of the sport itself. So, to take this conversation a little bit deeper, how important is challenge to flow, right? Because when you talk about flow, there's this effortless time melting away component. But when you look up flow state and you get one of those like images, the thing that comes to mind is like skill meets challenge. And certainly when I'm thinking about Wu Wei, that idea of fluency, of skill, of technical knowledge and experience, one thing I didn't hear you mention was challenge. And certainly whenever we're talking about sport, challenge is an inherent part. So where do you think challenge enters the equation for flow, either in our lives or maybe just more specifically in sport or in athletic motion or physical activity?
I think that's a really powerful point, man. I think challenge is, like you mentioned, a complete prerequisite in order to find this state. Um, Challenge is a very subjective term that is relative to whoever is in the pursuit of this state. What challenge means for that person is going to be very different, depending on skill level, depending on how open they are and vulnerable they are, in order to find these levels. So going back to Elevate is a framework, and it is how the sessions that we go through. The V phase, the third phase of Elevate, is Vanquish. So Vanquish is it's a very, that term has a lot of energy to it. Whenever I explain people the what each letter of Elevate stands for, people get very uncomfortable with the word vanquish, and they're like, "Ooh, that's a harsh term. Like, what do you mean by that?" And I think it goes to the fact of challenge is something that you have to get comfortable with, the fact that you got to be uncomfortable when you want to elevate and ascend to a higher level than you're currently in. So the fact that I maybe understated that in my previous explanation of everything is because of how much I embody the process. And maybe it is something that would be helpful to explain to a lot more people, because I do think that there is a level of risk needed, uh, and a level of being open to walking into the unknown and into a dark area in order for you to be able to vanquish preconceived notions, preconceived limitations. Or sometimes we lose the video game and the boss vanquishes us and we have to start the journey over, and that's totally okay. But that is a completely necessary part of the process. That's why the people that understand it are people who do compete, are people who do put, if it's writing, artists, they put their stuff out there. That takes a level of risk that a lot of content creators are not willing to put themselves out there for scrutiny. So whatever that level of risk is, one that I love to introduce to a lot of strangers or clients that will meet me, a big part of the way I train people is balance. And I get people on one foot. I get people on a balance tool, maybe on a slack line. And there's a huge fear of, oh God, my ground underneath me, my environment is unstable. And in there's so many lessons of where is your energy? How do you delegate it? How can you maintain control and composure when you don't have that stability? That is a necessary part of the process in order to overcome, get further down the process, and get familiar enough with the game you're playing in order to even find that flow state. So for me, myself, my own personal practice, I make it a huge thing to try to learn new things as much as how often as I can. And then all of the different tools and the ways that I'm challenging myself, all the styles of movement. Can I learn a new move, or can I upgrade the weight that I'm using, or can I make it feel more effortless, or introducing a new factor of unknown that I have to overcome in each and every session is the only way we can actually get further down the process. In music, they'll call that like the virtuoso, right? You get to or even in martial arts, I think, is where we're in expressive martial arts as well. It's like it's not just the person who can execute the thing perfectly, but even when the environment is chaos and there's other factors in there thrown in there, people are still able to execute, they're still able to overcome. And I think that's just even more a testament of that flow state, where it's not that you're in control of everything going on, but you're able to flow with every energy that's thrown into the system. You're able to find that synchrony, that sync, is that word synchrony? Like, but yeah, you're able to
Synchronicity.
fluidity there, yeah. That synchronicity there, yeah. So yeah.
No, this is great. This is great. And as somebody who's been a musician and being an athlete and has done all these things and have put myself out there and certainly experienced the whole starving artist phase probably a few too many times in my life, I really appreciate a couple of the themes that you're hitting upon when talking about challenge and talking about flow. And two of the big things that are sticking out to me are creativity and fun, right? And oftentimes when we're talking about anything artistic, we're not thinking about motion. So I really appreciate as well in your initial response to my big question, talking about how movement is its own language, movement is its own expression. But there's something that's very important about physical activity or sport when it comes to the challenge. And I find something like the competition to be a necessary component of recognizing and I would say experiencing flow through motion. And there may be some people out there who would question that. But I think that when we're trying to think philosophically about sport, and again, I'm trying to think about the East and the West and take both in, the element of competition is the public risk, right? That's the public risk portion of motion, right? That's even like a practitioner of somebody like Kung Fu, for example, it's got to be performed. It's got to be explored in a public setting where there's a risk of failure, and that risk of being vanquished, I think, by the boss is a really cool way. It's a really cool way to think about it. And this was the precise reason why the ancient Greeks believed that athletic competition was the best, we'll say, like tuning mechanism for individual virtue, because anybody can do something in private. Anybody can do something away from other people and call it challenging. But once you put yourself out there in a competition, say even just like in a 100-meter sprint, like I'm going to beat you from this side to the other side, well, now I got to do it. And all my experience, my training, the skill, the talent, the bravado, maybe the arrogance that I have is going to be on display. And one thing that I think elevates athletics over, we'll say, other artistic endeavors is that objective finitude of you do it or you don't. Like when you pick up your rope to do flow and maybe you lose a handle, right? For people who don't know, imagine like a big giant jump rope that's like more like a shipping rope, and you're just moving it around your body in these beautiful, expressive ways that are very difficult and dynamic. And let's imagine you've got your two hands on the rope, and all of a sudden one hand slips off, and that other part comes back. And I'm sure you've probably felt this and experienced it, and it hits you. You're like, oh man, there's a consequence. There's an absolute objective consequence that I was out of flow, I was out of sync, and I just got corrected by the universe, right? If I write a song, if I write a poem, if I do a painting, and everybody says, yeah, that's no good, I can still, yeah, but I like it. It's still good to me. So even in those artistic endeavors, there's always the subjective that we can fall back on. And not so much with my body. Not so much with my body. There's the visceral, objective reality that gravity exists, I exist within the natural environment, and I'm going to get feedback whether I want it or I don't want it. And when we put that part of the equation into sport, I wonder how important is this idea of like the public display or the public performance in identifying flow for you?
You know, this isn't something that I thought about often, but earlier before we started this show, I was telling you how I started playing pool again, and I started playing pool tournaments, and how I've added competition back into my life. And it's something that I haven't played pool for almost 10 years because of my career as a coach, and then as a business owner doing Elevate. We have our hand in so many things. We do retreats to the Dominican Republic. We have online programs. We do events and workshops all over the country. So we're busy doing that. So competition wasn't really something I had in my life for almost a decade. When I think of challenge, when I think of overcoming obstacles, I have gamified my movement practice, like I said before, and I find my personal challenge for the course of those last 10 years has been learning new things constantly, and then being able to coach other people to do the same thing. That's been my mission. Um, so before competing again in pool, I would have had a different answer than I do now. Now that I have been under the gun of pressure and playing against other people who are refining their own personal skill at a craft, and then we're going head to head, that's something I haven't done for a very long time. And it felt like it was itching a part of my brain and doing something for my mental health that I felt deprived of it. I was like, oh, I miss this, like I never thought I was going to play pool again until my buddy asked me to join a league, and then the league led to a tournament. And so I do think competition is a massive thing that if you're teaching me a lot also at the same time, so I'm trying to make sense of everything, but that Greek mythos behind competition, and maybe that's where the Olympics comes to play, but okay, cool. So that makes a lot of sense to me, and I do think there's something there that should be seeked by a lot of people. There's a lot of benefit there. It also makes me think of the act of gamifying life. Like we have leaderboards for video games, and we have incentives to get skills and items and upgrade weapons to slay bosses, right? We should be doing that for ourselves in life as well. Like we have the technology, we have the experience and the wisdom of the Greeks and people who came up with all of these beautiful philosophies from around the world. I think that there is a wealth of knowledge there and wisdom to be explored by all of us. So what that looks like, I don't really know, because like you said, like uh poetry is very subjective. How someone performs, artistic expression is very subjective. But there is also a benefit to quantifying your journey, trying to figure out where you are on this path, and giving yourself checkpoints to meet and to surpass and to overcome. is super important, and competition in one form or another is definitely a big piece of the puzzle for that. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. And for the ancient Greeks, like the classical Greeks in particular, competition was everything. Like they competed in everything. Who's going to build the best buildings? Who's going to craft the best mathematical theory? Who's going to dominate in war? Who's going to dominate in sports? Who's going to have the best philosophical argument? I mean, this is where the sophists come from. The people who just try to win a debate simply by appealing to the crowd, rhetoric, emotion, oratory. They don't necessarily even need to have the best arguments, but then the point becomes to win. And there's a paradox at play because you need the competition in order to orient yourself correctly towards the challenge, but then you lose yourself in the competition and then you lose sight of why you should be doing it. And it's no coincidence, I think, that the Greek myths and the mythologies of the ancient Greek athletes, the Olympic champions, they all sort of swirl around this idea of humility and hubris, right? The athlete should be humble. The athlete should toil, right? Oh my gosh, now all the words are flying in from when I used to be teaching all this stuff. Agones is effectively like the root word for agony, right? And that idea relates specifically to the righteous toil of the athlete, the discipline in training to acquire skill, to experience competition, to lose, to get up, to learn the lesson, to then victor, right? And even when you win, it's not good enough. Like winning once, shoot, anybody can win once. Like go back and do it again. Like there's something very profound about the symbolism. You mentioned like the Olympic Games. At the ancient Olympics, which was the ultimate of all of the ancient athletic competitions in Greece, and there were tons of them, right? But the ancient Olympics were number one, and they were a religious festival performed in dedication to Zeus, right? At the foot of Mount Olympus, and all the athletes would file through the ancient temple of Zeus, one of the eight ancient wonders of the world, and all that they would get for winning at the most prestigious event from the people that were putting on these games was an olive crown, right? A natural product that wilted. That by the next day it was gone. You couldn't even take it back to your home city to show people that you had won, right? And I think that's a profound symbol of how we need to approach achievement in competition through the challenge. It's like, I did it, I victored over myself, but now I'm back at square one. I'm back at the beginning. And if I have learned anything, well, then I've got to go and apply it to the next level. So that idea of the gamification of breaking through, but then needing to keep going. I mean, I think the ancient Greeks just nailed this part. And you know, you've been talking a lot about video games, and this is language I use a lot with some of my clients as well, because I think we all naturally understand, hey, when I like, and I always go to Super Mario because, you know, it's just one of the classic games and I'm a little bit old. You know, which is fine. But what happens like you're in level 1 in Super Mario, right? And then you get to the end and then you got to go to level 2. Well, you got to be better. Mario's got bigger challenges. He's got longer jumps or more fireballs. And then what does he need to do? He needs to acquire more skill. Oh, I got to become like the raccoon. I got to get the fire plant, right? I got to get the dinosaur. I got to get Yoshi. Like, I got to keep leveling up my skills in order to match the challenge every time I break through a plane, right? Of limitation.
Yeah.
And here's the really cool part. That's where the fun comes in. A video game's not fun if I just beat every single level and it's so easy that I don't even have to work. Like playing Super Mario is great because he dies all the time and he gets to come back. Like that's what makes it fun. We need to challenge ourselves. We need to be continually exposing ourselves to the risk, right? To the challenge, but not so that we can become arrogant, the hubris part, right? The Icarus flying too close to the sun, like I'm never gonna get burned. It's like, yeah, you're about to get burned, man. You're about to get burned hard. And the most I'm totally in prof mode now, guys. Like, sorry, that's how it works. The most famous of all the ancient Greek athletes, Milo of Croton, the guy who won the most crowns out of anybody, like at the Olympics, at the three other major festivals. He won the Grand Slam in Pancration 4 times. So that's winning all of the four major festivals in the same 4 years. He did that 4 times. Like, guy's a beast. He dies because of hubris, right? He's walking through the woods one day and he sees like a gentleman trying to wedge open a tree stump, right? So he's got like the wedge in the stump, and the old gentleman's hitting it with the axe. And Milo says, you stand out of the way. I'm Milo of Croton, right? And he sticks his hand in the tree stump so that he can force it open with his bare hands. And oops, his hands get stuck. And depending on which legend you want to go with, he either gets devoured alive by wolves or lions, right? So even the greatest of all the ancient Olympic athletes succumbs to his own ego, succumbs to his own arrogance because he believes, right? He believes the accolades of the competition as opposed to the process of continually humbling myself towards the challenge, right? So I really appreciate what you're saying here about competition, because I myself had that same internal struggle growing up as like a hyper competitive athlete who hated to lose at anything. Talking about video games, it's like, oh, when Mario dies, like I'm throwing the controller because I'm just angry. Like, how dare you? Gravity, take my guy down. So all of this, I think, is alerting us to this proper harmony between flow, creativity, expression, fun, but also discipline, competition, risk, and what I would say is like the objective realities of something like gravity. So yeah, you got any thoughts swirling around based on the little monologue I
Yeah.
just went on?
Yeah, I would say that whatever your competition may be, like we were addressing, I think that it's very subjective, like everything else. And for some people, they may be unwilling. Andrew Huberman calls it limbic friction, where it's like the part of your brain that there's this energetic threshold that you have to overcome. That is just that feeling that you just don't want to do the thing. He calls it limbic friction. For a lot of people, they have massive amounts of limbic friction just to go through the door and do the thing, whether it be a healthy habit or to challenge themselves in any which way, to go to the competition, to do the thing. It's the courage to post that piece of content that you've been sitting on, um, for some people that's competition enough, and then to a certain point it's no longer going to be that. What was a wall before turns into a stop sign. What was a stop sign before turns into a speed bump. What was a speed bump before turns into nothing. Turns into a ramp, which gets you to the next place, right? So, like, what is competition today will not be competition tomorrow. So, for the last 10 years, for me, again, it was refining what my business was, refining my own movement practice. And within my movement practice, my competition is, can I learn something new, or can I prove that I can express myself in that new thing, which is the vanquish phase of elevate. And then the T phase, like you said, is the tune phase, where after you go through that process, you're tuning into the new realities of what went right, what went wrong, what needs change, where I can get even further down the process the next time. So when you're able to find whatever competition means to you at that point, for some people, you might be getting after it on your own individual practice enough that the next step up is to do the thing in a public format or to do the thing in a competitive nature or, so I do think that it's something that is an exciting part of everybody's individual journey that should be given some attention to. For our framework of Elevate, I agree. I think when you're on the path to mastery, there is distractions on the sides of the path that you can very easily veer off the path. And as you get further down the path to mastery, the distractions get bigger and bigger. The objects get shinier and shinier. Yeah, exactly. So I do think that there is a level of discipline that you must have, and either you have a mentor or you're you have some kind of guidebook within the practice that you're learning that can help you. And if not, hopefully you find some kind of framework, if not Elevate in my company, but a path to lead yourself to success. Because even in learning, if you're a student, frameworks are super important. If you give yourself frameworks to learn, you can learn deeper and more complex concepts in an easier way, and you're setting yourself up for success. So having some kind of framework or mentor or way to quantify again where you are on your journey, giving yourself checkpoints, you're going to lead yourself to a much better place where you can actually find lots and lots of success, and you can exponentially grow when you put that kind of attention to yourself.
Yeah, that's those are some bangers, man. Gives me a really great idea for the next time I'm going to have you on, and we're just going to talk about the entire hero's journey, because that's basically all we've been talking about is the hero's journey, is the wheel,
Yeah, I feel like we can do
is the
this for
wheel.
hours, man. I really love this conversation, and I do think the hero's journey. If anybody's listening to this that's having a hard time, you you are the hero of your own story, and by we're all recruited to that in one way or another. And when you finally take to the call, it is going to be difficult, yes, but there are pathways to be more successful. And in order, I made a tweet this morning, like in order to, before you impress the world, you got to impress yourself. And I think you can do that by answering the call, because we are all the player in our video game, the hero of our movie. And the faster you realize that, the faster you get past that first awkward, icky scene where you watch the person, just falling all over himself and living by consequence before they decide to live life by design and to develop their superpowers and to really be an impact in their world. So we all have that. It took me, I was 26 when I realized that, around 25, 26, and now I'm 36, and I'm showing other people that they can do that. And my framework is Elevate, but it's nothing fancy, nothing brand new. There's hundreds of frameworks out there. It's really just about taking the action and just getting up and doing the thing. And we all have the ability to do that. So I really love this conversation, and I can't wait to do it again because I've learned a lot. So I'm pumped
Yeah,
about that.
yeah, for sure. And I'm gonna definitely have to land the plane here. But I know exactly how we're gonna do this, and what we're gonna do to finish off this conversation, because as oftentimes happens when you start any of these like broad philosophical discussions, you just sort of scratch the surface, and you feel like you're just getting, started, which, I mean, that's literally the same feeling I had yesterday running on the beach for the seventh time in 7 days on my vacation in the Dominican Republic. And I only ran for 5 kilometers, and to me, like, 5 kilometers, that's like the entry into a run, because, my particular expression is endurance training. Your particular expression is something different. And what I want to end off here is to give people out there some practical inspiration in starting their own hero's journey in fitness, using things like fun, creativity, passion, imagination, and thinking outside the box. But before that, I want to finish off my thought that I was just having on the hero's journey. We've been talking a lot about challenge, discipline, the unknown, and accepting that kind of public risk. You guys want to know like the cheat? The cheat to life is how fast can you move from that known part of the hero's journey back across the threshold into the unknown. And I think probably after this, I'm going to have to record my own podcast on the hero's journey. So if you're not sure, look for episode 26 or 27 or 28 of this podcast, and one of those will be on the hero's journey. Absolutely. But effectively, like the wheel of the hero's journey is a circle. The hero starts at the top. You're in the known, you're in the comfortable, you're in the familiar. And the call that AJ was talking about, that's the call to adventure. That's, I gotta shake it up. Something's gotta change. And then you move across the threshold. And the threshold is into the unknown. And if you're thinking about like a clock, you know, hero guy starts at 12. Threshold is usually somewhere around like 2, right? And then you come back somewhere around like 10 or 11. So most of the journey is into the unknown, is out there. And what we end up doing in our lives is we cross the threshold into the unknown. We go through the whole wheel, and we come back, and then we stay in that comfort zone way too long. So the faster you can move from the comfort past the threshold into the unknown, that's how you level up. And that's legitimately like what? Progressive overload in weightlifting. That's like sprinting. That's all the skill acquisition for any artistic endeavor. Oh, I just learned this cool new picking technique for guitar. Great. Well, how can I apply that by learning a whole new scale that I've never used? Oh my gosh, now this just opened up a way for me to play, 100 more songs. Something like that. So that's like the ultimate skill. And why I love athletics is it literally encodes in your body, in memory, your realistic experiences in doing just that. Okay. Whew, that was good flow. Now, to finish this off, one of the reasons I gravitated to AJ so much is because I see him doing all these really cool things with his body, with all these strange implements and tools. So maybe, right, to give people out there who are itching to go try something new in fitness, maybe you're somebody that's, looking to just establish a routine that's been elusive for you. Maybe I'm a standard gym guy, but it's getting boring. Or maybe I'm just a standard running bro and it's getting boring. Maybe talk to us a little bit about fun and creativity in moving our bodies with some implements or in some ways like that people just haven't heard of or experienced. You mentioned rope flow. I see you doing really cool things with maces and kettlebells. So maybe just take like a few minutes to introduce people to some of the creative and fun ways that you move your body, so that we can all get a little bit of that inspiration to go out and improvise with this language of motion.
Yeah, thanks, man. I think the amazing rant you just went on nailed it perfectly, and we can use that entire analogy to a tool, whether it be a kettlebell, a steel mace. For me, learning kettlebells, maces, ground-based movement is the easiest one because you don't have to buy a tool. It's really just connecting with your body and getting back down on the ground. But I say movement is a language, and it's a beautiful analogy, but it's also literal in the way that our system teaches movement. And I was able to learn some of these things. If you can think of your body the way it looks when it stands, when it's sitting, when it's in motion, I look at each of those like frames, like picture frames. And our body is based off of 5 main frameworks: squatting, hinging, pushing, pulling, and rotation. And with those 5 frameworks, when you juxtapose those on top of each other, you have all the beautiful, complicated ways that our human body is able to move. And we have this globe of influence, right? Where your arms and legs can actually span out. There's this globe of possibilities, like quantum physics. There's this globe, this space around your body that you have the possibilities to touch. And because of the rotators in your shoulders and your hips, you have this rotational capacity to touch this globe of influence. Whether it's a rope, whether it's a kettlebell, whether it's a mace, or whether it's your own body, there's these pathways like roller coaster rails that you have that you're able to produce movement. And I realized this first when I was just learning human movement and animal. Shout out to Animal Flow and Mike Fitch. Mike Fitch, Animal Flow is an incredible movement system based off of three positions: ape, beast, and crab. ABC. And ape is a deep squat. Beast is a floating tabletop, and crab is when your hands are behind you and your feet are on the ground. So through those three positions, they're like letters, ABC, he was able to teach transitions to get you from one letter to the next. And once you're good at connecting letters through transitions, you're able to learn the entire system of movement. So if you can do that with Animal Flow, and then you can repeat that with kettlebells, which we can. You learn the positions of kettlebells and how to transition, and you can get really good at kettlebells. And mace is the same, and the rope is the same. And something I found was if you learn the pathways in one system, like steel mace, for instance, the rope pathways are very, very similar. So if someone is looking to start out, the fun thing is wherever you choose to start out, wherever you should choose is the one that interests you the most. My first thing was kettlebells. Really, I went to a kettlebell course, and it was like 2 or 3 hours into the course that the coach, shout out to John Wolf, my mentor, he realized that we had 60 people in the room, and maybe 10 of them knew how to properly squat and knew how to properly hinge. So how could you teach people who can barely squat and hinge how to do a kettlebell clean or how to do a kettlebell swing? It's impossible. So step one is learning how to move your body, how to manipulate your body. And that is a language that you can get good at. And once you do that, the tool that you're adding to the system is that extra level, that X factor, that taking away stabilization that allows us to constantly find our threshold, that consequence, that risk, that challenge that we need to overcome to level up. So if it's kettlebell training or if it's steel mace training, it's number one, learning the move. There's a massive learning curve. That's the challenge. Once the learning curve is away, maybe we level the weight up. Once that is, maybe you can do two at the same time. You're always adding another level of intricacy to get that humbleness level back up and to get you back on the path, just to circle it back to the Greek mythos. And even with our company, with Elevate, we teach a framework, ELVT, but we also have pillars to the framework to help people stay on the path. Pillar one is awareness without judgment, because we're looking for patterns. And when you find patterns, there's going to be things you realize, and you don't want to burst the bubble by trying to attach some kind of emotion to it. Because for the most part, we find a pattern out about ourselves and we immediately put shame or fear or doubt or all these negative connotations to it, and then we never get better. So the way to overcome that is awareness without judgment. The second one is think less and feel more. Many times you're trying to learn a new skill and we get paralysis through analysis. And a lot of the times you got to think a little less, turn off that prefrontal cortex, and let your body intuitively just do the thing. And then the third one is how you do one thing is how you do everything. So like you said, everything in moderation, even moderation. Sometimes competition and that next level of adversity is a necessity, but it's also not something to overthink or obsess over. And neither is any other aspect of the practice. It's just this all-encompassing practice that is lifelong. And if you give yourself the vulnerability and the permission to pursue the game, and like in Mario, maybe die a couple times and learn your lessons and keep playing. It's okay, but you know, that is maybe the purpose of life is purpose itself and the pursuit of it. So why not pursue, you know?
It sounds like Aristotle right there, my guy. Like that's a pretty cool spot to land the plane. And it's very funny because we were talking before we hit record, and we was talking about me high-fiving people on the beach when I was running, and how some people like they're so in their headphones and so inside their own struggle of like the serious work of my run that they couldn't even be bothered to like slap hands with some dude who's smiling and telling him, "Hey guys, great job!" like you're doing great. So I think the final takeaway from that, it's sort of like one of my tags, which really isn't even my quote, and I forget which sport philosopher basically came up with this. It's probably Novak, but I don't know for sure. And that is, work is the distraction, and play is serious. So often in fitness and in exercise, we think of like the hard, and we think of the struggle, and we think this is a place of serious health consequences, right? Like I've got to get my vigorous activity so that I can optimize my health. And like, yeah, we all want to be physically fit and we want to be healthy, but at what cost, right? At what cost do we overemphasize the body and minimize like the spirit and the heart? And I love what you're saying about, like awareness without judgment. It's so often people get bogged down in the fitness world with the serious stuff. Oh, it's work. Oh, it's tracking. Oh, it's progression. Oh, if I'm not hitting this, I'm not good enough. Forget that noise, team. If you want to figure out how to become consistent, if you want to figure out how to level up in the fitness game, which then will transfer over into all these other areas of your life, right? Because we experience in fitness and in the body so viscerally that we can't ignore the truth, right, of what we have. And that's one of the reasons why we have the measurements too, is because it is the truth. Fun, creativity, passion. Enjoy what you do first. First principle is fun. That's play. That's the serious stuff of life. That's the purpose. Okay? And if you just start to aim there, it doesn't matter what you do. If you pick up a rope, if you go run 10 miles, if you want to do triathlon, it doesn't matter what it is you're doing, so long as it's an authentic expression of what you feel on the inside. And that's how we flow in this life through sports, fitness, and physical activity. Man, this was super cool. Thank you so much, AJ. If you liked what AJ was spitting, and I don't know how you couldn't, go check him out on social. I'll put his handle, Flow with AJ. Check out Elevate, ELVT. And yeah, we're definitely going to have you on at some point in the future to talk Hero's Journey, or maybe something completely different by that time, because who knows. This has been rad. And thanks again, AJ. I really appreciate that. And I will check you guys out in the next episode. Happy training, team.